The first witness was firefighter paramedic Anthony Flamati. In his testimony, he mentioned the firefighter apparatus lights up the scene. I want to note that in addition to that, the police would also be adding light to the scene. I think this is an important detail because if there was evidence here, it would be easier to see with all the light. And I want to point out that if the evidence is shards of tail light, that material is designed to be reflective, to be seen in the dark. Is it possible it was there and not noticed? Sure, especially given the amount of snow, but all this light would have increased the chances of it being seen. I'm still having trouble with the idea of 45 separate pieces. He testified there were 2 female parties at the scene.
So initially when you go over to Mr. O'Keefe, how many other people are sort of in that area at that time?
So in the area we have the first responders and then we have the 2 female parties.
Oh, really? Where was the third one? Was she somewhere else at the scene and thus Flamati thought there were only 2? Why not stick with your friends? Just throwing that question out there. Where was she? And the coat thing has been bothering me. And today there was some clarification. This witness testified that Officer O'Keefe was not wearing a winter jacket. What the heck?
What, if any, observations did you make as far as how he was dressed?
For the exposure, I'd say he was pretty underdressed. Long sleeve t-shirt, jeans. Nothing really substantial to be out in that type of weather.
I have questions. What was Officer O'Keefe wearing when Reed dropped him off? Was he wearing a coat? I suppose we'll get to that. Was he wearing a coat at the bar earlier? This winter storm was expected. So if he wasn't wearing a coat, why not? How did he expect to get home from this house party? Flamati testified he didn't know there was a shoe missing until they were already en route to the hospital. He said they wouldn't have removed the shoes at the scene, and in the event they felt it necessary to remove the shoes, they would have removed both of them. I guess at some point we'll hear about where the other shoe was found. Remember, police were searching out there, even using a leaf blower. They should have found the shoe out there if it was there. The prosecution has been asking the witnesses to point to where O'Keefe was found. I think that's to head off an anticipated argument by the defense. If the defense is going to say that the partygoers would have seen him out there as they left, why didn't they see him? The prosecution can point to the positioning and that as they left the house, they'd have been looking toward the driveway, which is not in the same direction of where Officer O'Keefe was. Flamati testified that O'Keefe was clearly visible to him even from a distance. One could argue that firefighters were actively looking for a man down, while the partygoers were not. One could also argue that if these partygoers were police officers, they should have also noticed, even though they weren't actively looking for anything. And the reason why I say this is because of training and habit. When you're a police officer, you kind of have your head on a swivel a lot. You have a habit of paying attention to what's going on. You notice things that other people don't. Flamati said he asked Reed what happened, and she said, "I hit him. Oh my God, I hit him." He said he asked her what she meant. He asked, "Did you hit him with your hand? Did you kick him?" He described a conversation, but said it was unproductive. Stick a pin in this. The bit about him asking her more than one question and having a whole conversation, it's going to come up again. Flamati testified that Officer O'Keefe's clothing was intact. This is important. He testified there was redness on the body from the cold. This redness is what happens before frostbite starts. I found this significant. Depending on the temperature, frostbite can happen quickly. It first gets at exposed skin, like fingers, nose, the top of your ears. Paramedics do describe his nose and fingers in a manner consistent with frostbite. That's no surprise. I find it interesting that his body was only red and not worse, considering he was only wearing a sweatshirt. If he had been out there all night in those conditions with no winter coat, I would expect him to be in worse condition, for his skin to be in worse condition, for there to be frostbite in other areas. I wonder if they will be bringing in anyone with expertise in frostbite and the length of time of exposure. Flamati testified O'Keefe's eyes were swollen and that there was abdominal distension. He said the distension could be from trauma or it could be from bloating. I trust we're going to hear from medical professionals in respect to the cause of this distension. Flamati noted no bruising or lacerations on the abdomen. The defense got the witness to clarify that the witness had an actual conversation with Reed and that he couldn't get the answers he was seeking. There were a couple of points to this line of questioning, one that will become obvious, but there's a less obvious thing here that I want to point out. And that is that there was so much going on and that it appears that no one person was assigned to stay with the civilian witnesses at the scene. That means everybody's getting bits of information without knowing everything that would have led to the elicitation of that information, without being aware of every intervening factor. How and why information or utterances come about does matter when assessing whatever came out. Witnesses were not separated and were not monitored, at least not closely. The defense showed dashcam video. He had a specific reason for this, which I'll get into, but I want to point out a couple of things. Note, there are only the 2 civilians here. Where's the third? Also, look at the top of the screens of each of these pictures. You can see Officer Good's dash cam shows him approaching the scene, so he wasn't already there. Firefighters and ambulance were already there by the time Good arrived. I don't know if this is going to be important. I'm just pointing it out because we now know we can't rely on the dispatch log. And that thing about inaccurate dispatch logs is bugging me. Was there ever an internal review as to how or why they were so inaccurate and whether or not other logs or other records are also inaccurate? What, if anything, has been done to prevent this from happening in the future on other cases? For official records to be wrong, unreliable, is a really big deal. Every defense lawyer in that jurisdiction is going to take notice. There was a long exchange during which the defense had Flamati go through the dashcam footage. There was a point at which Flamati walked out of the frame and the defense asked him where he went. He said he went to the ambulance. He went inside the ambulance, they shut the doors, and he did not leave the ambulance again until they got to the hospital. Nowhere on the video of the entire call was Flamati seen talking to Reed, let alone having a whole conversation. Suddenly, Flamati had trouble remembering whether or not he went to the ambulance and stayed there or if he went and collected equipment. Through the video, the defense was able to bring out that Flamati was not ever close enough to Reed and firefighter McLaughlin to even overhear Reed making this statement. He was already inside the ambulance with the doors shut. The defense brought out that it was only after Flamati was questioned by a detective that this came out. If there's video of that interview between this witness and the detective, I really want to see that. Were there leading questions? Was the interview tainted in any way? A tainted interview can taint an entire case. You can get witnesses to swear to something they never saw and never heard. You can even get people to give false confessions. It's not that the witnesses are lying. They fully believe what they are saying. People have been made to believe that they've committed crimes that they never committed. That's why the interview process is so important, and why lawyers want to see notes and hear audio and see video. It's shockingly easy to taint witness testimony. I'm not saying that happened, I don't know, but it sure looks like something happened here. I'm not willing to say that this witness is lying or conspiring, but at the very least, something tainted his recollection. The defense suggested Flammati never told the hospital that Reed made this statement. Flammati said he did tell them that there was a possibility that the victim had been struck, but the defense countered it was not in any record. Those of you who are first responders, heck, even if you have just your first aid, you know that mechanism of injury is an important piece of information.
You wrote a report as well, correct?
Yes.
We've talked a little bit about that report. There's an area in the report for a narrative.
Yes.
About your observations, your experiences with this patient, correct?
Correct.
Your job as a lead paramedic is to be as detailed as possible, correct?
Correct.
You want to provide and impart the most detail you possibly can about an incident to assist in medical intervention, correct?
Correct.
Take a look at page 3 of 5 of your report.
Yes.
You see that narrative area?
I do.
Can you point to that portion of your report where you indicate that my client said the words, "I hit him"?
It doesn't say that.
No paramedic is going to fail to note that, nor will he or she fail to mention that. On redirect, the prosecution tried to clean this up, but I don't think it was effective. He got the witness to say that Reed said this to him, but there's a problem. There's video of the entire call, and at no time did Reed have a conversation with him. The next witness was Matthew Kelly, firefighter paramedic. He testified he didn't see Officer O'Keefe until he got out of the truck. He also saw 2 women, not 3. He noticed O'Keefe was wearing a hoodie and was missing a shoe. He said O'Keefe had a swollen black and blue right eye. He said the victim was cold and stiff, that he had lacerations to his right upper extremity. He said Reed was running around screaming. She said, and I quote, he's dead, he's effing dead." When they got O'Keefe into the ambulance, those inside the ambulance included Flammati. He did not see where O'Keefe's other shoe was. He said they used trauma shears in the ambulance, not outside. He doesn't recall where the clothing went, but the protocol is to give it to the nurse at the hospital and that they usually put it in the patient's room. This chain of custody is important. The lawyers keep bringing up where the clothing went, and it's making me worry that maybe we're not going to see it. It's evidence. Nuttall and Fleming entered the hospital. At the scene, it was he and Nuttall who got supplies and then went to the body. He, meaning Kelly, did chest compressions while in the ambulance. Now, the lawyers are still trying to clean up here from Flammati's testimony. Flammati wouldn't say for sure if he did chest compressions the entire time at the scene. That this witness did not, that he did the compressions after O'Keefe was in the ambulance, helps the defense more than the prosecution. The witness was asked a lot of questions about specifically where each person was at the scene at specific moments, and he had trouble answering. He's not hiding anything here. Those scenes are so busy, and your focus is on your job. You're trusting your team members to do their jobs. You're not monitoring every second of what they're doing so you can testify to those details later. And of course, the witness has no idea why they're asking this stuff. He testified that once Officer O'Keefe was in the ambulance, they got in and shut the door. And Flammati was in the ambulance with them. And Flammati did not leave. He could not have heard Karen Reed make the statement he said he heard. I want to reiterate, this doesn't mean Flammati is lying. He may well honestly believe what he's saying. It happens more than you think that a witness will swear to something that didn't happen, but they're still not lying. Kelly testified that Reed was hysterical and distraught. The other thing to note is that Kelly was with Flammati the whole time that they were treating the patient. If Reed had said something to Flammati, Kelly would have heard it. Through back and forth with the witness, the defense was able to get out that this witness has been consistent in his testimony all along. The jury knows that other witnesses have not. So this was a clever move by the defense, I thought. This witness never heard Reed say, "I hit him." They played dash cam and the defense asked him to pay attention to the audio. They had to play it twice and the witness agreed he heard Reed say, "effing dead." On redirect, the prosecutor asked if the whole team was together the entire time and Kelly said no. They were doing different things at different times. Clever by the prosecution, but here's the thing. The question should have been if Kelly and Flammati were separated. But the answer would have been no, and that would not have worked for what the prosecution was trying to do here. The next witness was Lieutenant Frank Walsh, firefighter and paramedic. He also observed only 2 female civilians. He said Reed was distraught and saying, "Is he alive? Is he alive?" As they were loading Officer O'Keefe into the ambulance, he noticed his right shoe is missing. I think it's been established by now that the shoe was already missing before paramedics got there, and it's not like it went missing in the ambulance or at the hospital. His description of the injuries was consistent with what we've already heard. He did not go to the hospital. He spoke with Sergeant Good and told him O'Keefe had signs of trauma.
And just as far as what you told Sergeant Good, what, if anything, did you relay to him before you left the scene?
I relayed to him that there were signs of trauma in the patient.
And did you give it any sort of further explanation as to the signs of trauma that you observed?
Yes, I believe I told him what I told you about the hematoma on the eye and the blood in the nose and the scratches and lacerations on the arm.
So you told Sergeant Good what you've just testified to this jury that you observed?
I believe so.
Boom. Right here. If that scene wasn't already being treated as a crime scene, this is the moment. Rope it off if that hasn't been done, separate the witnesses, canvass the area. I mean, you get the idea, right? I expect to see ring video from neighbors, hear about how police woke up the residents of the house, etc. We shall see. And that clothing? Well, now that clothing is important. What steps were taken to secure and maintain the integrity of that clothing? The next witness was Katie McLaughlin, firefighter paramedic. She testified that Flammati told her to see if she could find out what happened. She spoke with Reed, who she described as hysterical and moving around, so she had to follow her to ask questions. Reed was able to answer some of the questions, but the conversation wasn't very productive. She said Reed said, "I hit him." And an officer there heard this and said, "You what?" And Reed repeated it. She said, "I hit him." McLaughlin had to leave. When she got into the ambulance, she told everyone in there what she'd heard. Right there. Flammati heard it. But from McLaughlin, not Reed. It would be easy for that statement to stick in his head and for him to actually form a memory that it was Reed who said it. So now we know an officer also heard this. Why then was Reed not detained there? She was able to leave and go to the hospital. So did the officer have a reason at that moment to not take her seriously? Or did he understand it differently? So it's not, I hit him with my car, I ran over him. What was happening there? What was he thinking? What was he interpreting that would cause him to not detain her? And was she read her rights at this time and questioned? Is she saying this because she was guessing at what might have happened or what must have happened? Does she mean she hit him with her vehicle? What led her to come up with this at this point instead of earlier? Lots of questions. Are we going to see a video interview of her? Someone in the comments the other day made a good point, and that is, if Reed ran him down in a fit of anger, it would make more sense for her to do everything she could to try to hide that instead of making a statement like this. Unless she testifies or we see a video statement where things are fleshed out more, we won't really know what led her to that and if it was a factual statement or a fear. That's all I've got for you today. Trust your gut. See you in the comments.